Hey guys, welcome back. This is Aaron. I'm back today to talk about Miranda Lambert, and it's been a little while since I did a country ranking. My last one was Luke Combs. Before I do that, I'm happy with viewership on my channel. It's increasing, but I still like to get my sub count up, so if at the end of this video you liked it, please consider hitting subscribe. Alright, pre-journey impressions. I'd heard a few songs prior to doing this. My two favourites were Only Prettier and Automatic. They were off two different albums, so there were enough hints of promise to make me want to do this whole discography. For reasons I'll get into a bit later, this ranking did get a little bit rocky for me at times, but I ended up being quite satisfied at the end and quite happy that I took this journey. All I'm counting here is the 10 solo albums she released with no other name but Miranda Lambert, so let's get to it. At number 10 I have Kerosene from 2005. I give this album 3 stars. Right away you can tell a big change from the debut on the opening title track. The still quite 90s sound of the 2001 independently released debut is completely gone. The sound's a bit rougher, a little dirtier, definitely more 21st century country. Pretty good opener. I can definitely say across the first couple of tracks that the sound has come a long way, but the writing still has a definite distinct flavour of youth. I'm definitely not getting a lot of wisdom or a ton of maturity, but this is still in the end a 22-year-old's major label debut. New Strings, definitely an understandable single choice. It's a leaving town song, which of course is very common in country. That's followed up by I Can't Be Bothered, which again in country, a common lyrical theme of saying good riddance to a breakup. I mean, these are very common country themes. I wouldn't say these songs do those themes really well, but at the same time they don't do them badly either. Through the first half listening to this, I wanted to say that I liked it a little bit more than I did, but nothing really blew me away. Second half, probably my least favourite to its point, was Love Is Looking For You. It was a little bit too slow for me, but not in the right kind of way. But then Mama, I'm Alright is probably the best song on the album. Above average lyrics for this album and a nice upbeat banjo lead sound. I might be a little controversial and say I preferred the 2001 debut to this album. For me, the maturity level really didn't shift all that much apart from superficial aspects of the sound. I'd give this a 3, but at great surprise to me, below the debut. At number 9, still at 3 stars, I have the 2001 self-titled debut, Miranda Lambert. Texas Pride is a cool song, something casual and unpretentious about its offhand style. This distinctly rather 90s country sound was definitely not something I was used to from Miranda. I was definitely used to a firmly more 21st century sound. Lying Here, a barroom feel to this ballad most definitely. Right away I can tell this is really good stuff for an independently released debut from a late teenager. I do notice though there's not really a ton of variance in Miranda's delivery or much of the music, especially in the upbeat numbers. Nonetheless, it still does hit quite a lot of the right notes musically speaking. General musical solidness of this probably makes up for the fact that Miranda's youth probably means she's just playing a role here and isn't really a honky-tonk lifestyle kind of girl. Wichita Falls sounds like it could have been a single. There's a slightly less anonymous sound to it than some of the other tracks on this album. What in the World and Jack Daniels though, not really a fan of those two. Miranda starts out her career with a very strong voice, but even she can't get away with writing about Jack Daniels as if it were a man. Technically this is surprisingly a solid effort in parts. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of 90s country sound, nor am I really expecting that from Miranda, but this had its moments. I could understand why some people would give it a lower rating though. Number 8, I have For the Record from 2011, up to 3.5 stars for this one. The opening track is really nice. It reminds me of an Irish folk tune in a way in the melody. Might have been one of the most explicitly major keys tunes she had to its point. Fine Tune is so different from the first track right away. Kinda keeps me off balance, but not in a bad way. I can respect the risk taking anyway. Fastest Girl in Town, that one's a hit. Safe is kind of searching for an especially good hook. It's not a bad listen, but already not up to Fastest Girl in Town from just the track before. Right when I was about to complain about a lack of slower, more heartfelt songs this far into the album, she comes out with Dear Diamond. Very good ballad. She kind of favours upbeat or attitude-filled material, and that's kind of more her artistry, I feel, but she's definitely capable of heartfelt tunes as well. Sometimes an old-fashioned, sappy kind of ballad hits the right spot. In general, there's a decent patch of pretty straightforward tunes in the middle of the album there. In general though, by the time of Better in the Long Run, I kind of realised even though some slower tunes are good, she kind of lost the identity established at the start of the album, with tunes that are a little bit more safe in general. I quite liked Nobody's Fool though, sounds like a hit. Overall with this one, I liked some individual songs a bit more than her prior work, and at one point I thought it could have ended up being one of her best albums, but in the end for me it still doesn't quite strike a perfect or close to it kind of balance. Another good effort though. Number 7, still at 3.5 stars, I have Crazy Ex-Girlfriend from 2007. Gunpowder and Lead, instantly likeable, immediately more rocking and energetic than most songs on her first 2 albums. Also much closer to the sound I first associated with Miranda with songs like Only Prettier. Yeah, good start to the album. Famous in a Small Town, great chorus. Overall, the rocking start established on the album at first holds well across the whole first 3 tracks. I had to admit, just in order of albums listening, Miranda's songs, technically they were often very well done, probably most of the time, but some of them had a little bit of trouble reaching my heart for some reason. Know what I mean? But this was still very early into the journey, so I wasn't discouraged as of yet. Just to be clear, I knew she had the potential and a lot of it was very much a me problem. One thing I was reminded of, especially on the title track though, how interesting and unique her production choices often turn out to be. Like the high mixed reverb heavy guitar, there are just some sounds that often pop up in Miranda songs that you didn't expect to hear. It's certainly not generic. But yeah, song after song of nice music that I wouldn't mind hearing around me but not necessarily get excited for. I was just struggling a little bit to imagine picking this album out again for some reason. Desperation and More Like Her made for a nice vulnerable spot on the album though. Getting Ready feels a little like filler, but it's the second to last song on the album and probably the first song on the album that really actively felt that way for me, so that's pretty good going. 3.5 because I felt like there was some improvement in sound and lyricism from the 3-star Kerosene. I still wouldn't have said I was massively enthused by it though. Number 6, 3.5 stars for 2009's Revolution. At that point, White Liar was probably her best opener to date, although I still think she could do better. But then Only Prettier comes on, which was my proper introduction to being interested in Miranda, the whole reason I ended up probably doing this discography journey in the first place. Really cool, sly, catchy song with probably the best chorus in her discography. I still think that after listening to all these albums. Loved it at first listen, so I don't know why so few of her songs after that for me hit me in quite the same way. Dead Flowers though combines quite a nice pensive verse style with a soaring chorus. I could already tell this was my favourite start to a Miranda album. It was just if the rest of the album could keep up. I must say I liked the trio of quite short songs. Airstream song probably the best. They just kept the pacing really nice and up on this album. I liked the sound of Making Plans, although there are a ton of spaces between lyrics on parts of the song. It kind of felt like a half instrumental in a way, which was kind of strange. Somewhere Trouble Don't Go. I can hear it's a good chorus, and it keeps the rocking sound going, but I can also kind of tell it doesn't quite live up to Only Prettier in terms of the rocking stuff. The House That Built Me though, I listened to that song before, but re-listening on this whole album, it hits me a little bit more than it did at first. I couldn't have said this about a ton of individual Miranda songs, but I would add that one to an individual country song playlist, which is good. Over the course of the album, I had to admit that the production was a little bit more straightforward country or country rock without some of the surprising sounds that sometimes popped up in her prior work. But I also have to say, despite not loving this entire thing, I would have said it was better than her first 3 albums for sure. Top 5 time. At number 5, I have Platinum from 2014, still at 3.5 stars for this one. Really solid opener, definitely sounds like a good hit material type of song. I know I'd complimented a few of Miranda's openers in particular before, but this one was definitely, at its point, the best opener she'd done. The title track was up next, again really fun. Because I knew that this album had Automatic on it, I kind of knew that if it could keep up the momentum that I would like this album a little bit more than some of her others. Little Red Wagon, a goofy fun one. Smoking and Drinking, as well as Priscilla for different reasons. I felt like this was the youngest a Miranda album kind of felt since the 2001 debut. And again, Automatic, I knew that one before the journey, instantly one of my favourites from her, a country playlist mainstay. Also stands out on this album for being a bit more maturely toned than some of the other songs. Okay though, a few songs afterwards, the album definitely establishes a light-hearted kind of feel, but I can't say it doesn't devolve into kitsch a little bit at times. There are a couple of songs with an old bluegrass-ish feel to them, but they kind of feel almost like parody a little bit. It briefly really recovers for me though at Babies Making Babies. Cool song. Hard Staying Sober. It's not quite as goofy as some of the other songs on here, but I quite like its down-to-earth relatability. In the end, I'd call this roughly her best album across the first half of her output. The mixture of old and new country styles, as well as the sardonic attitude to a lot of it, the effective way the album starts and ends, as well as the presence of automatic. I wouldn't say it's that much better than her prior stuff, but for me, yeah, it does enough. Coming in at number 4, last album at 3.5 stars, I have Postcards from Texas, her latest one from 2024. It's not very often for me that an artist or band's latest album gets into this high of a position. Good opening couple of tracks. This album feels like her most mainstream country pop, at least for a little while, but that's not such a bad thing for me. I kind of like some elements of the mainstream modern country sound at the moment. Also a nice sentimental mood to the opening stretch, punctuated most by the effective ballad Santa Fe. It would have been a little bit easy to take for granted or miss if you followed her career slowly in real time, but Miranda actually does kind of have an underrated command of creating moods through entire projects as a whole. For instance, a more mature, reflective tone like a lot of this album, or in contrast the more upbeat, sassy Platinum. Some of this album, like say with the more mournful keyboard flourishes towards the end of January Heart, are in danger of taking this a little bit far away from the fun side, but not in a terrible way. It's still a solid song. But then of course the sassier Wranglers comes on right after that song, picking the album up in mood immediately. I mean, that song's overall concept has been done a lot in country before, but it's still a fun listen. Same with Alimony, familiar concept, but another fun listen. Just Drunk, similar thing. This album is breaking up its two primary moods quite well. It's kind of funny though. I've thought at times throughout this entire discography journey that I'd like a few more sentimental moments from Miranda, but there are also times on this album that the more upbeat, sassy numbers coming on come as a little bit of a relief. Overall, I'd probably put this as her best 3.5 star album. I think it's part of the overall improvement that her album craft definitely underwent in the second half of her career, up to the present day of course. But ultimately, I wouldn't put this among my very favourites of her despite some very solid moments. The last 2 tracks on this album also kind of end things on a tame note. They're kind of mid-tempo, not too distinct. Number 3, I have The Weight of These Wings from 2016, up to 4 stars for this one. Running Just in Case, good atmospheric production and passion. Intriguing opener overall, although I also can't say I'd like much more of the album to sound just like it, if that makes sense. It works as an opener though. Ugly Lights is a cool song, but I can't say I was crazy about the vocal effect. I think live versions of the song could be really cool though. We Should Be Friends though. That one is a fun little single. By the time of Pink Sunglasses on disc 1, I kind of think that the persistent vocal effect is kind of giving this album a distinct flavour, but in terms of putting songs with that effect on my country playlists, I feel like they'd kind of stick out like a sore thumb a lot of the time. There's definitely another fun song though. Pushing Time though. Smoking Jacket is a good warm-up to it, but Pushing Time is a really good classic country style ballad. And thankfully the good sense was taken not to add the vocal effect present in much of the prior disc to that song. One of the most striking songs on the album that comes in on disc 2 is Tin Man. That's a really good ballad, much more explicitly sad than a lot of her other ballads. But there's definitely a place for songs like that on country albums and country playlists. For the Birds brings back a goofy fun vibe, kind of like Pink Sunglasses. Overall, I did really appreciate the personal sounding vibe on much of disc 2. I wouldn't really call any of them my favourite songs of hers, but there was nothing bad either. Bad Boy is a little bit lyrically weak, but it kind of sounds like a single material all the same. Overall, I had to make this my first 4-star Miranda album. That number probably doesn't reflect my enthusiasm for actually listening to it again, but in the end I had to give it up because this is quite a long album with no actual bad songs on it. And no matter who you are, that is not easy to do. Coming in at number 2, Palomino from 2022, still 4 stars for this one. Opener Acting Up, very low key as openers go. Not the most exciting, but intriguing all the same. 2 songs in, I was thinking this whole album had a good potential, despite a moderate start overall. In His Arms is good though, more palpable emotion than the first 2 songs most definitely. Then Geraldine at track 4, obvious homage to Jolene. A really strong single though. And I'm starting to like how the album is shaping up to be paced, with the first 2 songs on the album serving as a proper warm-up, most definitely. Overall, there's also a strong sonic cohesion on this, more than some of her past albums definitely, with the dry, highly mixed upfront rhythm section. The B-52s on Music City Queen kind of sound the same as decades ago, it seems. The lyrical idea about strange with doing something to keep yourself sane in strange times kind of sounds like it could have come about during COVID, but I guess this album came out a little bit too late for that. After a while, towards the middle, Wandering Spirit has a nice upbeat sounding choir, and I'll Be Loving You has a nice lyrical message, but I have to say neither song grabbed me quite as much as, say, Geraldine. I'm sorry, I know that song's really made obviously very catchy, but it's just too good of a sing. Country Money picked things up for me though. It kind of grew on me more as the song played on. There's a cool rich bass heavy groove and a sly kind of flow to the vocal performance. If I Were a Cowboy is a suitably good single as well. The Pursuit of Happiness is cute. Yeah, overall obviously not quite as good as my number 1 for me, but still quite good from start to finish. For me here, she was continuing broadly to improve an album craft. Chronologically, second 4-star album in a row here. Coming in at number 1, we don't get above 4 stars, but it's Wild Card from 2019. The production on Open or White Trash. It's definitely got some overt pop elements, but they work for the song. Overall, this is one of her most unique starting album songs, I'd say, just for that more overt pop sound. Mess With My Head reminds me of the 2000s for some reason, but not really in a country sense, more kind of in a pop rock sense. It's a nice little album track. It all comes out in the wash, really makes perfect sense as a single. Instantly, probably her most likeable individual track since Automatic. Instant playlist. I would have said that the album started out with a slightly superficial tone overall, but then settling down gets a little bit existential, and Holy Water goes back to being a little bit more rootsy. Overall, it was a pretty nice balanced start to the album. Way Too Pretty for Prison, another very fun playlist-worthy country pop number. Not the most original lyrical concept, but still expressed really well. The hits keep coming, like the fast rollicking Locomotive, and Bluebird is really cute. If life gives you lemons, just mix them in your drink. That has to become a proper saying if it's not already. I'm not as sure about How Dare You Love or Fire Escape. The choruses on those do lean slightly more noticeably repetitive. Still though, by the end this has some of her brightest tones on record. Nice pop influenced production balanced well with some rootsier moments, and a really nice patch in the middle there especially. For me, her most playlist adds from one single album. I was really impressed with this one, and it really restored my faith in this journey at a point it was starting to flag just a little bit. Quite a happy, positive sounding album overall, but not some of the slightly kitsch feel of Platinum. Okay guys, that was Miranda Lambert's album's discography. Definitely an important figure in modern country. At points though, I was looking for even some highs and lows in this discography. I thought at one point she was kind of the most 7 out of 10 artist consistently that I'd ever heard. I honestly felt like abandoning this journey a little bit during Weight of These Wings. As much as I don't love bad albums, of course, I feel like a whole sea of 3.5 stars isn't at the most interesting to watch as a viewer. But in the end, she kind of rescued herself for me a little bit. In the second half of her career, I feel like her album making really improved overall, which isn't always the case with artists and bands with large discographies. Another thing, I really quite liked how she mostly avoided lyrical cliches. And one thing I also really noticed, which could be a drawback for some but I didn't mind it too much, she doesn't really have one singular identifiable sound for me. But in her case it's not such a drawback because each album of hers kind of has an internal consistency to its sound, I feel. And she could also be surprisingly eclectic, but no songs on her albums ever really felt out of place with the ones around them, whether I personally loved them or not. That's about it guys, not my favourite absolute artist or band to have listened to, but and it's really cool how, and this is really rare, I feel like she only improved over time. She released her debut around 23 years ago, and that long in the game, artists and bands often get tired and start putting out less good stuff than their prime. But I'd say, musically speaking, Miranda's probably in her prime at the moment. Thanks for watching guys, I'll see you next time.